Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys been enjoying the content on the channel as of late. As you can tell, we are in a little bit of a different setup, just trying something new for the year and just, trying out some new angles and stuff like that. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Excuse my look. I'm looking to get all nicely cut for the new year. Just my hair has been going crazy and my facial hair and everything. I just need to freshen up. So excuse the disheveled look. It's just I haven't gotten to the barber, so hopefully making that trip tomorrow. But um, talking about time itself, we are in a brand new year now, 2025. We had just wrapped up 2024, so I figured, as we typically do each year, I would like to do a full recap about 2024 in film. So primarily in this video, we are just going to be discussing the financial sides of 2024 because quality is a very subjective thing. So, I can say that, like, for instance, I could say that my favorite film of the year personally was Perfect Days. And I know a lot of other people will probably have a very, very different opinion on that. And to give you the credit where credit's due, the worst film of the year, in my opinion, would be Megapolis. That was just an embarrassment. But it's a very subjective thing, So I just feel it'd be kind of like me just rattling off my personal favorites, And I don't think that would really encapsulate, really, define the year that was 2024 for film. So I think it's more important to illustrate the actual facts of the year rather than the subjective nature of it. So, because we all have our personal favorites, or the films that we did not like, and I think that it's actually more. I think it's more informative to actually just look at things more factually this time around. So let's just look into it more financially speaking and just view it from that confine. So let's get into it because there's a lot of different variables at play here. And while we're doing this, if you may notice, there's a little bit of space here. I'm actually going to be putting up some pie charts because I just went to town. I just did a bunch of pie charts for a bunch of different things. And I'm going to let them play here in the corner so that you guys can get a visual illustration of what it is that I'm trying to discuss. So let's get into this. Okay, so here's the first thing I'll say. In terms of defining a definition for 2024, like if there was a word that would perfectly describe 2024, and again, speaking financially, I would say that the year was and I even extend that further to just discussion of film in general. I would say it was a fairly mute year. I think that's the best way to put it, because it's not to say that financially overall, if we're talking about total gross, it wasn't a complete dud. I mean, just getting into our first point here, this year's total gross after collecting last bit of money throughout the last few days, the total gross for 2024 came at $8.54 billion. And that would be putting it at least 4.1% behind last year's gross, which was $8.9 billion in 2023. And of course, it's largely behind, that of like 2018 and 2019, which back then that was like $11 billion. So we're far from that. But it's to say that, if you're to judge it based off the pandemic era, which, it's really unfair to say, but just using those numbers, we have numbers as low as 2 billion, and the 2022 got to 7 billion. So being at 8.54 billion is not a terrible place to be when you compare those numbers, but when you compare to that 2018, 2019, it is extremely telling of the times that we were in. So financially speaking, it wasn't a complete dud of a year, but it was to say that there was just not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of spirit that was in film this year, and especially with audience members. A lot of audience members just chose to stay home because, as we've also illustrated on this channel, streaming has become so much more prominent in the film culture. So, a lot of people are just deciding to just stay home, and wait for films to show up there because it's cheaper, it's more convenient, it's more controlled, and you're a lot more focused. You don't have to worry about having to deal with weird audience members or very disrespectful people who are just going to sit there and just act like they're literally in their own living room, So it's just a lot better, and it affects, obviously that of the performances of film, because as also been proven through that, that time when HBO Max was rolling out their film strategy of releasing all their films on streaming, and then other studios were following suit. We saw with that strategy, obviously, that is not plausible. It's not a great option, especially for a lot of these high budgeted films. You need to rely upon the theatrical experience because there's a lot more proven success, and just by the actual money that is made, the theatrical experience has more money, or there's more. There's less variable, there's less barriers than that of streaming. Less have things that you have to contend with, and thus more money that is there to be made. So yeah, it's just the times that that are coming very, very quickly, just because of the pandemic, and just unfortunately with the effects of the pandemic, and it's just really been sitting in. We've talked about this since 2022, I think, about just fatigue forming and people just becoming really disenchanted with a lot of franchises and IPs. And it's not to say that there's not been any exceptions to that. As a matter of fact, the two films that crossed $1 billion, because there was only two, those two films were Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. So, it's to say that there is still life in IPs, but what I'm basically getting at is that audiences are becoming extremely, extremely selective and extremely picky as to what they'll invest into and go into the theater for. So, and also to note, the top 10 highest grossing films of the year are all either sequels, adaptations, remakes, no original content. I think at one point throughout the year, it was literally all sequels. So, again, kind of illustrating the appetites, kind of illustrating, again, what audiences, because audiences are a weird thing, because they're very hypocritical, because they'll say they want original content, but then they never go out and watch those films, even though they ask for that sort of thing. They're asking for originality within familiarity, which basically is only spawning a different variation of familiarity, essentially. It's give me something new that still has the same exact taste. It's as I've kind of used as an analogy before, it's basically putting a cherry on top of vanilla ice cream. That's essentially what audience members want. And I don't think that's making a significant difference, a big difference there at all. But basically what I'm getting at is that audiences, the mentality ultimately and what their tastes are has been relatively the same. It's just that they are also now contending and understanding that they are getting exhausted by the volume, the material, and for some people, just literally the IPs themselves. I've seen people getting sick of superhero films. I've seen people getting sick of Star Wars, especially. There's just a lot of people getting just exhausted with a lot of these notable IPs and notable franchises. But the hypocrisy within that is that depending on what the subject is, they'll come and see it anyway. Case in point is looking at the two highest grossing films of 2024. So, and also just to get more into a financial side of things, which I think is interesting regarding, talking about being selective. It's funny how studios will not disclose, because I'm just to kind of bridge off from that conversation, because ultimately, fatigue is fatigue, and that's, that was going to be inevitable because of the introduction of streaming or the awareness to it, but also just by material. People are just going to get exhausted by things. Nothing ever lasts forever. That's just life, right? But I guess moving on from that, I was trying to find some way of connecting those two things, and it just didn't work out. But moving on to, I would say, the other point that I want to bring up, another observation that I had throughout the year, And I was going to dedicate a video to this, but I guess I'll just bring it up here. I find it very fascinating that studios are very selective with disclosing like information when it comes to production and marketing expenses. I've been noticing that a bit, especially just recently. We don't know marketing expenses for Sonic 3. We don't know any marketing expenses for any of these more smaller but like mildly known projects like Nosferatu, A Complete Unknown, and other things throughout the year. And it's weird, right? I mean, we'll know things about like other notable figures like Deadpool, Wolverine, but we won't know anything about like Dune Part 2 or anything like that. At least to my knowledge, I don't know anything about that. So, like, what's with that? You know, like, why have certain information out and then have no information out? It's very, very weird to me. I wonder if it's because they want to present their product as a little bit more profitable when in reality it isn't, because that's the only rational thing that comes to mind. And I think that that's just being deceptive. And I think that that's just, let's be honest, probably just trying to please their shareholders and their investors, trying to show that they're not investing too heavily, you know? Maybe that's the idea behind that. But I've been noticing that quite a bit too, that, you know, studios are just being very careful or being just very random with putting out information like that. We have information regarding Wicked, right, which was a $300 million investment once you consider the marketing cost. And everyone keeps calling that film a success, even though the film has yet to reach $1 billion. It's something like 600 million. Like, that's not a success story, guys. I mean, it really isn't. So, but I just find that weird. Yeah, I just find that very odd that, you know, studios do that nowadays, and at such a apparent, you know, like it's so apparent that they do it now. So, but yeah, I mean, generally with what I'm saying so far, you know, it's to say that, like I said at the top, it seems to be a pretty mute year. It seems to be a year of great fatigue. It seemed to be a year of great cynicism as well, because, like I said, a lot of just discourse, a lot of just discussions regarding just, you know, just interest in material, you know, and what does get people interested nowadays. And, you know, what that might mean for 2025, which we will be doing a video on. I will be discussing my overall predictions for that year in a separate video. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Probably be the next video after this. So, but let's get into some finances, because that is the most telling factor. You know, I can say all I want about like just this and that, but really the evidence to what people are liking or not liking, and really just overall what I'm saying about being selective and all that, does that translate to the financial sides of 2024? So let's get into it. So here's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to bring up significance from each studio, like, you know, basically giving you like a category and showing you the significance, you know, in that front from that studio. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to break it down into ratios, telling you each studio's, you know, best success to compare to their failures, and ultimately showing you where things stack up for each company and just generally with the year as a whole. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to mention right off the top is the thing that we kind of addressed already, which is the studio with the most successful films of the year obviously went to Disney. Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine ended up becoming the highest grossing films of the year, each taking at least $1 billion. And with that also, there was other films that they ended up racking up money with, films such as Alien Romulus, which did really well for them. And of course, Moana 2, which also did very, very well for them. So they ended up having the most success in 2024. But in terms of the company that had the most amount of successful films, because Disney had the most successful films, but this company actually had the biggest amount of successful films. That company is Universal Pictures. They actually had 7 films this year that did fairly well. Just to mention them real quick to you, those films include Night Swim, Kung Fu Panda 4, Monkey Man, Despicable Me 4, Speak No Evil, The Wild Robot, and Conclave. So they ended up doing fairly well in that front. They actually ended up collecting a lot of success in terms of just volume, in terms of amounts. Now, generally being with the high tiers, that goes to Disney, but Universal can say that they had at least the biggest amount of successful films. And an interesting category to bring up, I've noticed when doing my ratios, is successes outweighing failure. Basically, in terms of the failures that had with a studio, they had successes that outweighed that. And funny enough, it was actually Paramount Pictures. Paramount Pictures had a 5-3 ratio. And the 5 films that ended up doing well for Paramount are as followed: Mean Girls, Bob Marley, One Love, A Quiet Place, Day One, Smile 2, and most recently, and probably will end up becoming profitable, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So I think that's very interesting as well. But getting to the other side of the equation, talking about the failures real quick before we get into some ratios. The biggest failures, just overall, in terms of kind of the opposite to most successful films. These are the biggest failures, the biggest bombs of the year. That one goes to Warner Brothers. I mean, we're talking, we'll get into ratios here and talking about the losses, but in terms of just the profits that were not made, Warner Brothers kind of takes the cake on that one. And just to add another category to that, the most amount of failures. I mean, Warner Brothers had the biggest ones, but in the most amount of failures, that crown, I guess you could say, goes to Sony Pictures, which they end up having 10 failures this year. Some of which include, if I pull up the list here real quick, some of which include Madam Web, Ghostbusters, Fly Me to the Moon, Kraven the Hunter most recently, Venom The Last Dance, which I know some of you guys will say was a success. It wasn't, because remember, they never disclosed any marketing costs, so we don't know, because I know that they marketed that film a bit, so just relying purely on the production cost, yes, it may seem that it was a success, but when you can think about marketing expenses, the film probably had to do something a little bit more, say like $600 million to break even. So, and it didn't end up doing that. So that's a failure. So, but yeah, so that's those are some of the categorical ways to view 2024. But now let's get into some of the ratios. Let's get into some pie charts here. And, so just to lay out the groundwork here, the pie charts that I'm about to introduce to you, these are based on the most significant releases. So we're not talking about all the movies. We're not talking about every single release that's come from these companies this year, this past year. We're just talking about the most significant ones. And we're also talking about what was the most and the least profitable for each company based on those significant releases. So we're not strictly talking about the literal amount of money that was made. We're not talking about this movie making $700 million or this movie making this amount of money. We're talking about by just how much production was and just by general investment, by information that we basically know, to the actual figures that ended up becoming for that film. How largely, what were the profits there, So in that we get a better illustration to what were the actual wins for each company. So an instance, like if a film performs like 2 times rather than like 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, you're gonna get what I'm saying. It's like the higher the times multiplication the times does, that's where you notice that those are the actual bigger wins for that studio, rather than the actual more minor ones when you think about it. So let's get into it. So hopefully I explained that. In good detail. But let's get into it. So the first one we'll talk about, Disney. So for Disney's ratio, that was 4-6. So They had 4 successes and 6 failures. The biggest win that they had, obviously, we talked about it a few times, Inside Out 2. Their biggest loss so far, I could tell, is going to be probably Mufasa, the Lion King. It's not doing well for them. Definitely don't see that getting towards the billions that it probably needs to do. So, and I think Disney is aware to it too. So, yeah. So that was definitely their big loss so far. And to match that in ratio 4-6, Warner Brothers also matched up in that ratio. Their biggest win, to me, was Dune Part 2. That one seemed to be their big win for the year. And to the other side of that, their big loss of the year obviously was Joker, Folie à Deux. It's crazy to see how universally rejected that film was. Like, it's been so long to see a movie just get completely rejected by audience members, especially to something like to the scale. You think like the sheep mentality would outweigh that. People just come to see the movie just because it's Joker, But no, people just were not like vibing with it, and the numbers show. And the numbers show not at all profit really made. So there you have that. So moving on, let's get into Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures had a ratio of 3-10. So they had three successes compared to the 10 failures. Those 3 successes include the Garfield movie, Bad Boys, Ride or Die, and to me, what their biggest win was for this year was It Ends With Us, which is also fairly unfortunate given all the drama that's happening right now behind the scenes of all the legal stuff, and probably the unfortunate results of that, probably with regards to Blake Lively potentially doing a sequel and all that. It's kind of unfortunate, but yeah, that's to be seen. We'll talk more about that in the news roundup because there's been more stuff going on, lawsuits, blah blah blah. So we'll get into all that. But credit's due. Financially speaking, It Ends With Us, I think, really was their thing that they should be celebrating the most on, because that really did great, especially on such a low scale. It was a $25 million thing, ended up doing 5-6 times its budget, so it was a huge success for them. Now their biggest loss, I think we can all agree it was probably Kraven the Hunter. Yeah, I mean, it's $100+ million thing, and I think it ended up doing $50 million. The writing was on the wall for months. They knew that it was not going to do too well, just because they kept pushing the film back all the way back to December, and that's I think pretty telling. So Sony was not having a great year. Sony was not having a great year really at all. But moving on from that, let's get into Paramount Pictures. So we just talked about Paramount Pictures. So they're the only company that can actually say that they had more successes than failures in 2024. Because like I said, they had 5 compared to 3. So and those 5, did I mention the 5? I don't know if I did. I did mention those 5, yeah. Of the 5 that I had mentioned, their biggest win for me would probably be Smile 2, because again, small scale, we're talking 20 million, something like that. Ended up grossing I think over 150 or something like that. So again, something 5 times, 6 times. So huge success for them when it came to Smile 2. And to the other side of the equation, their biggest loss, obviously Gladiator 2. Obviously, in terms of just the production cost, in terms of the marketing expenses, just the enormity of it all. Yeah, and it was that film too was supposed to be doing $1 billion. And if I check real quick, actually, purely out of curiosity, let's see where it's at right now. It is at $435.2 million. Yeah, so that's a failure. That's quite the failure. So yeah, But hey, they had more successes than failures compared to the other studios, but not again. Again, it's really, again, to illustrate again, it's just really been a down year. It's not a terrible year, but it's definitely not been a great year, for a lot of these studios. So, but moving on, let's get into Universal Pictures. So they had a 7-9 ratio. So 7 successes compared to 9 failures. Their biggest win, I would say, was Despicable Me 4. Surprisingly so, they had a production cost of like $100 million, which you would think at this point they would go like probably higher than that. And they closed out, close to $1 billion in the box office. So that's a huge win for them. The Minions just remain strong. Their biggest loss of the year, I would say probably Argyle. This is it's a toss-up because I could say Wicked because that's kind of more in-house, where Argyle was, Apple Studios, but then they just handed it over distribution-wise to Universal. But Universal ultimately does have their name on it in some regard, so I am going to count it. So in terms of just what is the biggest loss, I would say probably Argyle. Wicked would definitely be at number 2, though, because again, we're talking about a $300 million investment, and has not reached that milestone. So, but I would say Argyle is probably their biggest loss, if based on the measurements, based on just what I've seen. So yeah. Okay. Speaking of failures, let's talk about Lionsgate. Lionsgate had a 4-9 ratio, so 4 successes compared to the 9 failures, and man, they had a lot of failures. There was literally an article that came with, I think it was the release of Megapolis, where they talked, or no, I think it was for that Halle Berry film, Never Let Go, I think it was called, and they just talked about just a streak of just all these failures that Lionsgate had this year, and it was fairly eye-opening to realize, like, oh my god, yeah, they're not having the best time. And yeah, they had very little to show. They had a few successes, four success stories. Of those 4, I would say that the one that they should be the most happy with is The Strangers Chapter 1. That was done dirt cheap, and that ended up doing, I think, like 4 or 5 times its production. So they should be very happy about that. What they shouldn't be happy with is Borderlands, which is my biggest loss for Lionsgate. I would put Megapolis, but let's remember Megapolis was a self-funded thing, and Lionsgate just distributed it. So they, financially speaking, they don't have much involvement in that front. So I'm not going to really count Megapolis. That's more of a Coppola thing. Borderlands, I believe that's more in-house. So yeah, so that is probably their biggest loss, and yeah, that's just. I think that might be the biggest failure of the year. I think it is, because they really didn't make much money. I don't remember. I think Argyle performed a little better compared to Borderlands. Yeah, it really just came and went. Just no one really talked about it. So there you have that. Getting down to the wire, we have 2 more studios I like to get through. We have A24. They had a 2-9 ratio. Now, A24 usually doesn't have a lot of juicy success stories. Like, they usually just come and go. Sometimes they get some notable films here and there. Their most recent one, outside of this year, was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which also was a very good film. But they usually just come and go as a company. They don't usually have big eye-opening, oh my god, that this film, outside of films that I've mentioned, like Everything Everywhere All at Once or stuff like that. And this year is kind of the same. They just kind of came and went as a company. Their biggest win of the 2 I would say it was Heretic, the Hugh Grant horror that ended up doing like 4 times its production costs. So I would say that that's their biggest win. Their biggest loss is their most recent release, which was Baby Girl, that Nicole Kidman erotica thing that I seriously don't understand why she would want to do that as a film, but she has that on her resume. And this was not a great year for A24, but then again, I don't know if they usually have great years, so I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell if A24. You kind of have to do some investigation, and you may see that they have more failures than successes. So, but speaking of more failures than successes, the last studio that we're going to mention is Amazon. Amazon decided to dip into the theater a few times this year, and they only had one one notable success, which was The Beekeeper, which starred Jason Statham. Yeah, that was literally their only one that I can find. They had 5 other failures. Those include the film Challengers with Zendaya, which is just really not a good film. Blink Twice, My Old Ass, which is another just ugh. Most recently, a film called The Fire Inside, which I've seen a few advertisements for. And to me, their biggest loss, that they themselves will not say is a big loss because it's going to really matter once it drops on streaming, which I don't understand the rationale behind that, but whatever. Obviously, is the film Red One. Easily their biggest loss. And I don't understand why the company still will bend over backwards to justify the investment and justify everything. Oh, guys, trust me, just don't worry about the numbers. Just don't worry about it. It doesn't matter to us. We don't care about those numbers because once it goes on streaming, that's when it's going to really count. Just to translate that for you, meaning when we put it on streaming, we don't have to worry about the actual figures anymore because we could just hide them at that point and nobody will know. Nobody will know, even though we put it in theaters and we should just dump it on streaming in the first place if we just wanted to hide it. Like, you know what I mean? If you wanted to hide it, then you might as well just dump it on your platform. But you took the chance with the theater and it failed. It failed miserably. So yeah, that is the year in terms of a financial view. Just to give you the ending of it in terms of all the movies, the most notable ones again, putting it all together, ratios and everything, you have currently, or just by the amounts that I took for this study, I guess you could say, 34 successes compared to 54 failures. Yeah. So that's the year. That is the year for 2024. It was not a strong year. It had a lot of failures, a lot of notable failures. This especially on like big tentpole fronts, Joker, Furiosa, Borderlands, lots of failures, and there were some notable successes, but the successes were either expecting or not as significant compared to the 2 films that Disney has as in the $1 billion club. There wasn't much of a surprise. There wasn't much of a consistency. The only real consistency was just a lack of, in terms of finance and an apparent dip in audience, viewership and just people coming to the theater. And I think that's just going to translate further in 2025. And there will still be people trying to make it seem that everything's okay. They're doing that right now in the media with like all these like headlines from Variety, Hollywood Reporter. They're trying to make it seem like, oh, guys, this year was kind of all right. I mean, wasn't it? We had some good films. We had this and that. But it's like, yeah, but maybe view the finances. And actually look into it, and you'll see that, yeah, most, if not all, the studios struggled this year. I mean, as I've illustrated, I mean, there were some successes, and through these charts that you've been seeing throughout this video, yes, there were some success stories. There absolutely was. But it's when you look at the other side of the equation, when you start to notice that there's a lot of room to grow, and I hopefully by the time we get to like 2026, hopefully studios start to wake up and they start to realize that we don't need to be investing as heavily, because that's another thing that was really apparent this year too, was a lot of the cost, the expenses, they are just becoming out of control. They're just becoming huge, and they need to scale back because audiences are just not showing up as much as they used to. So you need to meet in that, and you need to lower the expenses so that you can make it so that you can make money. With less audiences, you can't put up these giant figures, because if it's just going to be this small group of people, they're not going to be able to give you the money that you need to justify it all. So you need to lower your expenses. You need to meet in that viewership, meet in that meet in just the amounts that are arriving to the theater. So hopefully those are lessons that they carry or discover, hopefully this year or in 2026. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, to close it out, because man, this is a long video. We've been going for almost 40 minutes now. To close it out, basically, it was definitely like as I said up top, it was very mute, but it was just very like, it just seemed like very very vanilla, it just didn't have much substance. There wasn't a lot that happened outside of just expecting successes and things that we expected to fail, or things that we saw were not going to do well also didn't do well. There's a large fatigue that is happening. There is also a apparent disinterest to going to the theater. These are things that are becoming more dominant, and I think it's just going to become bigger, or just a little more, just going to be continuing to grow as the years go on, because the benefits of streaming are they're there. Everybody knows it now. They see it. They see the benefits there, both financially, because it's just so much cheaper, and just by, convenience. It just has so much more benefits than having to pick up your kids and your folks and whatever like that, your friends, having to drive to the theater, pay like $40-$50 just for the tickets alone, and then having to buy food. It's expensive, so it's not a trip that people want to do all the time anymore. It's a trip that they only want to do like maybe a few times a year, for something that they believe to be truly special. And that translated, I think, a lot into the finances this year, with audiences becoming extremely selective on what they will or will not watch. And it comes again to familiarity, again, the conversation of what is profitable and what isn't. As I've illustrated within these finances that we have, just with the films that did well, it really boils down to just the literal. It's no longer the Marvel Studios logo. It's no longer the DC logo. It's no longer the Star Wars logo. It's literally what, That's why, films in the Marvel side of things, like that's why recently films like Ant-Man, that Captain Marvel movie, like there's reasons why those movies have failed, because people just don't care for those stories, and they don't care for those specific characters. They want to have company within characters that they already enjoy. So characters like Deadpool and Wolverine, you put those two together, yeah, people will come and show up in waves. Inside Out 2, a film for children that is very educational, but also for adults is very enjoyable and has garnered a lot of attention over the years. Of course, people will come and see that too. Alien Romulus, very familiar franchise, a beloved horror franchise. Of course, people will come and see it and want it too. It's like, all these things. These are things that, that people want to see now, and it's just how audiences are. They'll demand for originality, but really what they want is just give me what I like. Me no like that. I want this. But it's the same thing. It's just a cherry on top of vanilla ice cream. No, but it makes it better. It's like, you know what I mean? I mean, does it really? I mean, it just seems like it's more of the same. Um, but, but yeah, I have been talking for a long, long time now, and I feel like I'm starting to like kind of lose my sense of self. But to wrap it up, I think that it was definitely not a great year. It definitely wasn't. I would not say it was a bad year. I would not say it was a terrible year. I would honestly think that 2023 was worse, even though total gross will, say another. I think that if you go look at the actual, case by case basis, I think that 2023 has some more notable failures. I don't know. It seems kind of like wishy-washy. 2024 might have worse. I don't know. But I would want to say 2023 has worse. So, you know, comparatively speaking, I think 2024 was a little bit of a step up, but it's to say that it's a tiptoe. It's not a massive step up. It's just a little tiptoe. So, and I think that's just really where it's going to be, for Hollywood for the next couple of years. It's just going to be a lot of tiptoeing, just a lot of just like this. And within that, they'll praise. They'll say, "Oh my gosh, we're doing just fine." I just saw like an article somewhere where some CEO guy was just talking about how 2025 is going to be a relatively normal year, and I'm like, so what? 2025 is going to do like 11 billion like back at 2018, 2019? Of course not. We're never ever going to reach those heights ever again. It's just impossible. We're never going to get to that place. Just because of streaming, the awareness to it now, it's just no, that's never ever going to happen. What's going to happen is that the theatrical experience is going to shrink. I mean, it's already shrunken. The window, the release window was cut in half a long, long time ago. I did a whole video about that, and you guys can check that out if you want to hear more about that. But like what I mean by that is that, it's you're gonna end up having less auditoriums because there's less people that are coming. You're already having less attendance, so it's just gonna shrink, but it's gonna shrink very, very slowly. So, and eventually, it's the digital age, so of course the next gradual step for film is going to be a digital platform. So you will end up ultimately be watching movies from home eventually. It's just some people are just getting in on that earlier than others, and that's becoming more apparent. So you can't fight it. I mean, you just can't. The only thing that can combat it is just trying to feed into that interest and looking on social media and seeing what people are saying, and what they're saying is that they're just tired and exhausted, and they are just kind of becoming disenchanted with IPs and to some extent just film itself. So yeah, it's still very trying times. It's still very bleak times. But I can't sit here and say that we are in as bad a territory as 2023 was. I would like to think that we had a small little boost, just a little boop, like if I were to make a noise, like it was a little boop, but not like a massive, like, oh my gosh, we're back, because we're never getting to that place again. Never. You never will see a 2018, a 2019. We're never going to get to those heights ever again. That era is gone. So we're in this era now, and it's a very time. And I feel like that's really as high as we're ever going to get. It's just So, yeah, we'll see what 2025 has to offer, and we'll talk more about that in the next video, seeing where I think things are going to be, financially speaking. But we'll see. I'm not seeing much for next year in terms of just, like great financial success, but maybe I'll be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, obviously, but there's a lot of factors that work against film nowadays. Streaming absolutely being the one thing, but yeah. So those are my extended long thoughts on 2024 as a whole. It was So you guys let me know your thoughts on 2024, your guys' thoughts on just the financial side of things. Do you guys have a different perspective than I do? Do you guys think there was more successes compared to failures? What were some of the lessons that you think that 2024 had in terms of film? What do you think could be brought over to 2025? Your predictions for next year. What do you guys think is going to do great? What do you guys think is going to bomb? Your most anticipated films, obviously. What are some of your films that you're looking forward to this year? Let me know all your thoughts, all things considered, film-wise, from this year to the next year, or at least the year we're in now. Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in for this long video. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.